Imagine being told you only have months left to live. The scans are clear, the diagnosis undeniable. Terminal lung cancer, aggressive and unstoppable. Doctors prepare the family for the worst, the patient begins to say their final goodbyes, and hope fades with every passing day. But then, just when everyone had accepted the inevitable, something so shocking happens that it leaves the medical world speechless. Overnight, without treatment, without explanation, the deadly tumor simply vanishes. One evening, she goes to sleep preparing for death, and by the next morning, she opens her eyes to a future no one thought possible. Doctors called it impossible, specialists said there was no way back, yet the proof was right there on the scans. The cancer was gone. This isn't science fiction, this isn't a movie. This is a true story that has baffled hospitals, left researchers scrambling for answers, and given hope to millions who thought their fight was over. But how did it happen? Was it a misdiagnosis, a hidden cure, or something truly miraculous? In the next few minutes, you'll hear every unbelievable twist, every emotional moment, every piece of evidence that proves this story is unlike anything you've ever heard before. And trust me, you won't want to miss a second, because just when you think you know where the story is going, another twist will leave you stunned. So grab your seat, hit that like button, subscribe for more unbelievable real stories, and let's dive into one of the most shocking medical miracles ever recorded. The story begins with an ordinary woman whose life was about to be turned upside down in the most terrifying way imaginable. For weeks, she had felt a persistent cough, one that refused to go away no matter how many home remedies or over-the-counter treatments she tried. At first, she brushed it off as allergies or maybe the lingering effects of a cold. But then came the fatigue. She found herself exhausted after climbing just a few steps, her chest tightening as if every breath carried a weight. Concerned, her family urged her to visit a doctor, and that decision would change everything. A chest X-ray revealed a shadow on her lung, and what began as a routine checkup quickly escalated into a whirlwind of tests, CT scans, blood work, biopsies, all confirming the same dreadful truth. The diagnosis was lung cancer, advanced and aggressive. When the doctor finally sat across from her, his face solemn, his words deliberate, she felt her world collapse. He explained the cancer had spread to areas that made surgery nearly impossible. Chemotherapy and radiation might slow it down, but they would not stop it. The prognosis was grim. She was told to prepare for the inevitable, and her family broke into tears as the doctor gently explained she might only have months left. The news spread through her circle of friends and relatives like wildfire. Everyone reacted with shock, disbelief, and sorrow. She was still so full of life, yet now she faced the countdown of a ticking clock. Determined not to let despair swallow her, she tried to carry herself with strength, but behind closed doors, the weight crushed her spirit. She began writing letters to her loved ones, preparing messages for birthdays and milestones she believed she would never see. Nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, she would stare at the ceiling, coughing into the quiet darkness, wondering how much longer she had before the pain became unbearable. Her family tried everything to comfort her. They cooked her favorite meals, surrounded her with laughter, even planned small outings to make her days feel normal. But nothing could erase the looming shadow of the diagnosis. Hospital visits became routine, each one a reminder of the enemy inside her body. The beeping of machines, the smell of antiseptic, the cold, sterile air of waiting rooms, all of it etched into her memory like scars. Even as the doctors spoke of treatment plans, their eyes betrayed the truth. Hope was slim. And yet, even in those darkest days, there was a spark within her. She refused to let cancer define her entirely. She prayed, she meditated, she leaned on her faith and the unwavering support of her family. Still, the fear remained. Every new scan showed the tumor growing, defying every attempt to slow it down. It seemed unstoppable. At one point, a specialist delivered the hardest blow yet. The cancer was advancing so quickly that treatment might only prolong suffering rather than extend meaningful life. She went home that night, broken, clutching her diagnosis papers, tears streaming down her face. It was supposed to be the end of her story. She began preparing to say goodbye, her family bracing for the unthinkable. But little did they know, the story was just beginning. Something was about to happen that would shatter the limits of medical understanding. A twist so unexpected that even the most seasoned doctors would be left questioning everything they thought they knew about the human body, disease, and survival itself. Days turned into weeks, and the cancer showed no mercy. Her cough deepened into something harsher, a sound that echoed through the walls of her home at night, keeping her family awake and filling their hearts with dread. She struggled to climb stairs, gasping for air with each step, her body weakening under the weight of the disease. What once were simple, daily tasks, pouring a cup of tea, folding laundry, walking to the corner store, now felt like climbing mountains. Her weight dropped drastically, her clothes hanging loose on her fragile frame. Friends who visited tried to mask their shock, offering hopeful smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Hospital visits became a cycle of routine and despair. Each scan revealed the same grim picture. The tumor was growing, spreading with terrifying speed. Doctors adjusted medications, tweaking doses, recommending different approaches, but the truth was evident. Nothing was working. The cancer was winning. In one particularly devastating appointment, her oncologist sat down with her and her family to deliver the hardest truth yet. The tumor had spread into areas where treatment could no longer touch it. Aggressive therapy might only drain her remaining strength, leaving her bedridden and suffering. With tears welling in his eyes, the doctor gently explained it was time to consider palliative care. Her family sat in stunned silence, the words striking like lightning. She had always been the rock, the one who held everyone together, but now they were being asked to prepare for her final days. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at a cup of untouched tea, the reality sinking in. She began to make peace with the idea that her time was ending. She wrote more letters, filled journals with messages for her children and grandchildren, hoping her words would carry her love long after she was gone. She even began organizing her belongings, leaving notes with special items for each family member. The house grew heavy with sorrow. Her family tried to put on brave faces, but the unspoken truth hung in the air like a dark cloud. They began praying harder, lighting candles, asking for strength, for comfort, for some kind of sign. Nights grew quieter. The only sounds her labored breathing and the occasional sob, muffled behind closed doors. She tried to stay strong for them, but inside she felt a storm of fear and resignation. Still, a small part of her refused to let go completely. She found herself praying not for survival, but for a miracle, even if she knew such things were said to be impossible. Each day became a gift, each smile from her family a treasure. And then came the night that changed everything. It was late, and she went to bed convinced it might be her last. Her body ached, her chest burned, and she whispered a final prayer before closing her eyes. In that moment, no one in the house could have imagined what was about to happen. Because while her family braced for the end, something unexplainable was already beginning inside her body. Something that defied science, defied logic, defied the very boundaries of life and death. By the time the sun rose, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning began like any other, or so her family thought. The house was quiet, sunlight spilling through the curtains, the faint hum of life carrying on outside. But inside her room, something extraordinary had happened. She woke up different. For weeks she had struggled just to breathe, every inhale heavy, every exhale filled with pain. But that morning, she noticed something strange. The tightness in her chest was gone. She sat up in bed slowly, expecting the usual wave of dizziness, but it never came. Her lungs, once suffocated by the tumor, felt light, almost free. Confused, she placed her hand over her chest as if searching for the pain that had haunted her for months. But it was simply not there. Her family rushed in when they heard movement. To their shock, she was sitting upright, smiling faintly, and whispering that she felt better than she had in months. At first, they thought it was adrenaline, maybe denial, or a fleeting moment of energy before the end. But as the hours passed, her strength seemed to return instead of fading. She ate breakfast without coughing. She walked to the window without gasping for air. She even laughed at a joke her son told, a sound the family hadn't heard in weeks. Concerned, yet hopeful, her family called her doctor. When he arrived, he prepared for the worst, expecting to comfort a family in grief. But when he saw her standing, alert, breathing normally, his jaw nearly dropped. He immediately ordered scans, certain there had to be an explanation. The family followed anxiously to the hospital, hearts pounding as she was wheeled into the imaging room. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the results came back, and what they showed left the entire medical team speechless. The tumor, the massive, aggressive growth that had invaded her lung, was gone. Not shrunk, not reduced in size. Gone. The images showed nothing but clear, healthy tissue, as if the cancer had never been there. The doctor checked and rechecked the scans, calling in colleagues for second opinions. Nurses whispered in disbelief. Technicians printed copies of the images over and over, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. There was no medical explanation. Tumors do not vanish overnight. Cancer does not retreat without treatment. Yet here it was, undeniable, staring them in the face. When the doctor finally walked into the room to explain the results, he was pale, his hands trembling slightly. He told her and her family that what they were seeing was beyond medicine, beyond science. Her cancer was gone. The family burst into tears of joy, hugging each other tightly, sobbing with relief and gratitude. She herself sat in stunned silence, tears rolling down her cheeks as she whispered prayers of thanks. The news spread quickly through the hospital. Staff crowded the hallway, some smiling, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A few even called it a miracle right there on the spot. News of the vanished tumor spread through the hospital like wildfire. Doctors from other departments left their stations to see the woman who had supposedly defied death itself. Some came with skepticism, others with awe, but all carried the same burning question. How could a cancer that had been so advanced, so well documented, simply disappear overnight? In the conference rooms, specialists pored over her medical records. They examined her biopsy results, the blood work, the original scans that had shown the tumor in terrifying detail. Every piece of evidence confirmed the diagnosis had been correct. There had been no mistake. The cancer was real, aggressive, and inoperable. Yet now, the latest scans painted an entirely different story, as if someone had erased the disease with a single stroke. Some doctors whispered theories. Could it have been a rare immune system response, a spontaneous regression of cancer so uncommon that most physicians would never see it in their lifetimes? Others muttered about lab errors, though none could explain why the new results were so consistent, repeated across different machines and verified by independent technicians. The truth was impossible to deny. She had been healed. The head of oncology himself visited her room, his face etched with disbelief. He asked her questions about her symptoms, her diet, her routines in the days before the change, desperate to find a clue. She could only shrug, explaining that she had gone to bed expecting never to wake up, only to rise feeling lighter, freer, unshackled from the weight that had been crushing her chest. Word spread beyond the hospital walls. Journalists caught wind of the story, their headlines dramatic and urgent. Woman's deadly lung cancer disappears overnight. Doctors stunned by miracle recovery. Reporters crowded the hospital entrance, eager to capture a glimpse of the woman who had become the center of a worldwide phenomenon. Religious leaders called it divine intervention. Scientists demanded further investigation. Patients battling cancer clung to the story as a beacon of hope, filling forums and support groups with renewed faith that the impossible might not be so impossible after all. Meanwhile, her family could hardly believe the whirlwind around them. One moment they were preparing for funerals, the next they were giving interviews about a miracle. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, and yet through it all, she remained humble, soft-spoken, her voice trembling as she insisted she had done nothing special. She said she was simply grateful to be alive, grateful to breathe without pain, grateful to hold her loved ones and feel time stretching before her once again. Inside the hospital, staff who had once walked past her room in silence now lingered, peeking in as though they might catch a glimpse of something supernatural. Nurses whispered about the case in break rooms, doctors argued late into the night, some excited, others unsettled. Because if this could happen once, what else did it mean for the understanding of medicine, disease, and healing? For her, the frenzy outside mattered less than the quiet moments with her family. She sat with her children, held her husband's hand, and savored meals that no longer tasted of fear. But she could not ignore the fact that the world was watching, and her story had already become larger than her own life. It was now a question mark hanging over science, a challenge to everything people thought they knew about the human body. And this was only the beginning. The true storm, the one that would pit faith against science, skeptics against believers, and inspire millions across the globe, was still gathering strength. Within days, her story leapt from local newspapers to international headlines. Television crews parked outside the hospital, their lights flooding the street at night, eager to capture any glimpse of the woman whose cancer had disappeared without explanation. Social media erupted with posts and hashtags, her name trending alongside words like miracle, hope, and healing. People from every corner of the world began following her journey, leaving thousands of comments on videos and articles. Some shared their own battles with cancer, saying her story gave them courage to keep fighting. Others claimed it was proof of divine power, while skeptics demanded scientific answers. The divide between belief and doubt only fueled the frenzy. Doctors from around the globe reached out to the hospital, requesting her scans, her medical files, anything that might help them understand what had happened. Conferences buzzed with heated discussions. Some argued that this was a rare but natural event known as spontaneous remission, though none could explain why it occurred so suddenly, overnight, and so completely. Others warned against sensationalism, insisting that such stories risked giving false hope. But even the most skeptical voices could not deny the evidence. Her scans were real, her records accurate, her healing undeniable. Cancer patients clung to her story like a lifeline. Support groups filled with messages of encouragement, people saying they no longer felt alone, that maybe there was still a chance for them too. Families battling despair played her news clips on repeat, pointing to the screen and telling their loved ones not to give up. Messages poured into the hospital, addressed to her, letters filled with gratitude, prayers, and confessions of renewed faith. The hospital's mailroom overflowed, and nurses carried stacks of envelopes to her room. She read them slowly, tears filling her eyes as strangers called her their miracle, their inspiration, their proof that life could still surprise them. Religious leaders traveled to meet her, eager to declare her recovery a sign of divine intervention. Some even held vigils outside the hospital, singing hymns and lighting candles, turning the entrance into a sea of flickering lights. Scientists, meanwhile, were cautious but intrigued. Teams proposed studies, genetic testing, immune system analysis, searching for even the smallest clue hidden in her biology. Was there something unique about her cells? Had her immune system mounted an unprecedented attack overnight? Or was this truly beyond the reach of science? Inside her hospital room, the woman listened to the storm unfolding around her and felt torn between gratitude and disbelief. She had gone to bed expecting death and awoken to find herself at the center of a global conversation. She never asked for attention, yet now her name was on everyone's lips. Her family shielded her as best they could, but even they were overwhelmed by the tidal wave of calls, requests, and cameras. Which struck her most were not the debates or the headlines, but the quiet messages from people who said her survival gave them hope. Mothers with children in chemotherapy, fathers clinging to life after surgery, young people terrified by their diagnoses, all saying that if she could survive the impossible, maybe they could too. That realization gave her a new sense of purpose. She began to think that perhaps her story was not just about her own survival, but about the countless lives it might touch. The miracle was no longer hers alone. It belonged to every person who dared to believe that even in the darkest nights, light could still break through. And as the days passed, she started to realize that her life after cancer would never be the same because she had become a symbol of something far greater than herself. In the quiet moments, when the reporters left and the hospital halls grew still, she finally had time to think. For the first time since her diagnosis, she wasn't consumed by fear or pain. Instead, she was overwhelmed by a single, haunting question. Why me? Why had her tumor vanished while others continued to fight for their lives? She had no answer, only gratitude, and a growing sense of responsibility. She replayed the months leading up to this moment. The tears, the sleepless nights, the conversations where doctors gently told her there was nothing more they could do. She remembered signing paperwork for hospice care, preparing her family for the inevitable, writing letters for milestones she believed she would never see. And now, here she was, sitting upright, breathing freely, looking forward to a future she had once mourned. It felt surreal, almost like waking up in someone else's story. But as the days passed, she began to see that this was her second chance, one she could not waste. She started speaking with patients on her floor, sitting by their bedsides and sharing her journey. Some listened with tears in their eyes, others with cautious hope, but every conversation reminded her that her story had power. It wasn't about science or miracles anymore. It was about human resilience, the strength to keep going even when the odds seemed insurmountable. She also spent time alone in the hospital chapel, where the silence allowed her to process the enormity of what had happened. Sometimes she prayed, sometimes she just sat in stillness, but always she left with a deeper sense of peace. Her family noticed the change in her too. The woman who once spoke in whispers about death now talked about plans for the future, trips she wanted to take, books she wanted to write, causes she wanted to support. She even began journaling every day, trying to capture every emotion before it faded. Writing helped her untangle the swirl of gratitude, confusion, and determination that lived inside her. She wasn't naive. She knew there would always be people who doubted her story, who tried to explain it away as a fluke or a misdiagnosis. But she also knew what she had lived through, and nothing could erase that truth. The experience had stripped away her fear of death, but more importantly, it had taught her how precious every breath truly was. Slowly, she started to dream again. She imagined volunteering at cancer support centers, speaking publicly about her journey, maybe even writing a memoir to help others navigate their darkest days. Her doctors encouraged her, impressed by the strength they saw blooming in her spirit. Some of them admitted that her case had changed the way they thought about medicine. One even told her that he now approached his patients with a little more humility, knowing that sometimes the body can do things science can't explain. Her children clung to her with a new kind of love, more intense and tender than before. Her husband, who had spent countless nights holding her hand and preparing himself to say goodbye, now looked at her like a living miracle. And in many ways, that's exactly what she was. Yet she resisted the idea of being placed on a pedestal. She wasn't special, she told herself. She was just a woman who got another chance. And she intended to spend it making a difference. With each passing day, that mission grew clearer. Her story wasn't meant to be locked away in medical journals or whispered about in hospital hallways. It was meant to be shared, to ignite hope, to remind the world that even when life seems impossible, miracles can still happen. And deep down, she believed that maybe, just maybe, her journey was only beginning. It didn't take long before invitations began arriving from around the globe. Television programs wanted her to appear. Health organizations begged her to share her story, and conferences reached out with offers to have her speak to doctors, researchers, and patients. At first, she hesitated. She was still adjusting to the shock of being alive, still waking up each morning half expecting the nightmare to return. But then she remembered the letters from strangers, the messages from patients clinging to her survival as proof that hope was real. She realized that her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who needed light in their darkest hour. So she said yes. Her first public appearance was on a local news broadcast. Sitting under the hot studio lights, she looked nervous but radiant, her voice trembling at first as she recounted how she had gone to bed with death on her doorstep and awoken with life renewed. By the time she finished, the anchor was in tears, the studio crew stood in stunned silence, and phones in the newsroom lit up with messages from viewers who said they had never been more moved. Soon she was invited to larger platforms. National talk shows flew her in, cameras capturing her smile as audiences rose to their feet in applause. She spoke not as a scientist or a theologian, but as a survivor who had lived through the impossible. She didn't claim to have answers. Instead, she offered honesty, telling people that while she couldn't explain what happened, she believed her healing carried a message: never give up, even when hope seems gone. Her humility and authenticity resonated deeply. Crowds lined up after her talks, some just wanting to hug her, others desperate to tell her how much her story meant to them. Cancer patients held her hands with trembling fingers, whispering that she gave them strength to face another round of treatment. Parents of sick children thanked her for reigniting their faith. Even doctors who had once dismissed the idea of miracles admitted that her case had shaken their certainty. As her story spread internationally, she became a symbol of resilience. Headlines called her the woman who defied death and the patient who stunned science. Religious groups celebrated her as proof of divine power, while medical journals cautiously documented her case as one of the rarest spontaneous remissions ever recorded. But she was never interested in fame. She turned down offers for movies and book deals that sensationalized her story. Instead, she chose to focus on advocacy. She partnered with cancer support organizations, visiting hospitals to sit with patients who were losing hope. She spoke at medical conferences, urging doctors to treat every patient with compassion, reminding them that statistics don't define individuals. Every trip left her exhausted but fulfilled, her purpose clearer with each life she touched. Yet through all the attention, she remained grounded. She still cooked dinner for her family, still took long walks through her neighborhood, still savored the simple joys she had once thought she would never experience again. The miracle had not made her feel untouchable. It had made her cherish fragility, teaching her to see every moment as a gift. And so her life became something greater than survival. It became a beacon, a reminder to the world that the boundaries of possibility are not as fixed as we believe. Wherever she went, whether standing before thousands or sitting quietly by a hospital bed, she carried the same message: hold on, because you never know what tomorrow may bring. And with each story she shared, The ripple of her miracle spread further, touching hearts she would never meet, inspiring faith in people who might never know her name, but who would carry her courage into their own battles. As the years passed, her story continued to ripple outward, but the greatest transformation was not in the headlines or the conferences. It was within her own heart. She had once been a woman marked by fear, consumed by a countdown she couldn't stop. Every cough, every ache, every shadow on a scan had carried the weight of death. But now she lived with a freedom that no diagnosis could take away. Every sunrise felt like a personal gift. Every laugh with her family like a treasure hidden in plain sight. She knew her time on Earth was finite, just as it was for everyone else. But instead of shrinking in fear, she chose to expand in gratitude. That shift made her presence magnetic. People didn't just want to hear about the miracle. They wanted to feel the peace she carried. They wanted to understand how someone who had stared into the abyss could emerge with such light in her eyes. She never pretended to have easy answers. When asked if she believed it was faith, science, or pure chance, she simply smiled and said, maybe it was all three. That humility, that refusal to reduce her survival to a neat explanation, made her story even more powerful. It left space for others to see their own meaning in it. For some, it was proof of divine intervention. For others, it was a reminder that medicine still holds mysteries waiting to be unlocked. For many, it was hope, raw and tangible, the kind that helps you take the next step when you think you can't. In quiet moments, she would sit with her journal, writing letters to the future generations of her family, grandchildren she might never meet, descendants who would one day ask about the great miracle that saved her life. She didn't want them to remember her as the woman who was famous for defying cancer. She wanted them to remember her as someone who chose to live fully, to love deeply, and to never surrender to despair. That, she believed, was the true miracle. Not just that her tumor vanished, but that she had been given the chance to live with new eyes. The medical world never stopped studying her case. New researchers revisited her files, looking for genetic clues or undiscovered immune responses. Some called it spontaneous remission, others called it divine mystery, but she called it grace. She refused to waste her second chance trying to explain it away. Instead, she dedicated herself to multiplying its impact, letting her survival become a seed of inspiration planted in thousands of lives. In her final public speech, delivered to a packed auditorium of doctors, survivors, and families, she ended with words that would echo long after the applause. Life is fragile. Science is powerful. Faith is real. And sometimes the impossible happens. Don't let statistics steal your hope. Don't let fear steal your joy. Live, fight, believe, and never forget that miracles can come when you least expect them. The audience rose to their feet, not just in admiration, but in recognition of a truth that went beyond her story. She had become more than a patient, more than a survivor. She was a living reminder that the human spirit is unbreakable, that possibility stretches further than logic, and that tomorrow always holds the chance for something extraordinary. And so her story didn't end with the day the tumor vanished. It continued in every person who whispered her name in prayer, in every patient who found strength in her survival, in every doctor who looked at their patients with renewed compassion. It lived in the quiet spaces, in the tears of gratitude from families, in the determined eyes of fighters who refused to give up. Her life was proof that even when science runs out of answers, the story isn't over. And as long as her story is told, hope will never run out. Because sometimes the impossible isn't just possible, it's already happening.